After weeks of heated debate, hours of intrepid reporting, and an entire state holding its breath, burning the midnight oil, trolling social media likes, the dramatic conclusion of the Justin Jefferson holdout saga is here. He showed up to minicamp. It was actually a whole bunch of nothing. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Luke Braun. Let's find some joy today. You can find the Locked On Vikings podcast wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is an audio platform or YouTube or even Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And a special shout out to all of my hashtag everydayers, those of you who do listen to the show every single day. I appreciate you guys so much. Sound off in YouTube comments or on social media if you can. And today on the show, mandatory minicamp has begun for the Vikings. I've got a few notes here. A lot of them came from Sam Ekstrom, a co-host over on the Minnesota Football Party, as well as, Ben Gessling, Matt Collar, all normal faces you find on the beat. This show should start, though, with the biggest news. Justin Jefferson showed up, and it was absolutely not a big deal at all. So I hope you didn't panic too much in OTAs about Justin Jefferson not being there. I tried to tell you, it's not a big deal. This is kind of makes sense. Danielle Hunter, he is not going to show up. That was discussed on yesterday's show. If you want something that's a little bit more real, but yeah, there was never going to be a case there. And the other voluntary OTA kind of holdout name was Dalvin Cook, who of course he's not going to be there now. Justin Jefferson did speak on his absence. He said he was working out in Miami, taking a bunch of endorsement deals. He just kind of had better things to do, which fair enough. It's just OTAs. And if it's, a business thing, right? He's just trying to make his money. Yep. Fair enough. And also working out in Miami, working out on his own. There's plenty of other reasons to do that. We talked about Justin Jefferson not being there when it was first reported, when OTAs started a couple weeks ago. So if you want to really know about it, you can go listen to that one. But he said, there's no problem with him showing up to everything from here on out. It's all mandatory now, not voluntary. So he's going to show up. He said, whether or not there's a contract by the start of camp, it will show up. I believe it was Access Vikings. I want to say it was Ben Gessling said that he anticipated the contract getting done somewhere around the beginning of camp, which is about standard fare. That's when this kind of thing would get done. If there were an extension like now, that would actually be pretty early, which would be fine. But, that would be early in the calendar, I guess. So that's where we're at. And O'Connell and Justin Jefferson throughout this whole thing and both kind of said, hey, yeah, we've got a great relationship. Everything is great. Justin Jefferson has been at least forward facing, completely apathetic to money. He's just, my agent will figure it out, which is what most players say. Of course, the agent is going to play a little hardball. Vikings will play hardball. Like that's going to be a process, but it's a process. I mean, both sides, you do this for a living. You understand what this is. If I can understand what this is, those sides can as well. Right. So he gets on the field and immediately shows out, right? Like he puts on a show and it's awesome. And everybody's very excited to have him back. Elsewhere in the wide receiver room, we still don't have Jordan Addison back, but Kevin O'Connell he had a press conference. I guess the two nuggets that you should care about from that are that he said he expects Addison back by the start of training camp, so probably wouldn't expect him for minicamp here, but then you've got 6 weeks for whatever that is to heal, so hopefully he should be back by then. If he is still not back, then even if he's back but limited, then it's okay. If he's still not back, then we kind of have to start asking harder questions about all right, what is the actual timetable here? But still, even if he suffered a significant injury, as long as it's not, the ACL-IR thing, but even if he suffered a significant injury, he's got 3 months before it matters, or 2.5 months before games are played that matters, right? So, even if it's the kind of injury that would keep you out 5 weeks, well, we've got 5 weeks to spare. That's how I always feel about these spring injuries. We don't really, I think we very, very often overreact to them. And there are people who have been in my DMs and YouTube comments and stuff kind of getting really scared about it. For me, it's not a lie until it is, I'll take what the team tells me until it is very clearly untrue. When they talk about injuries. And the new regime doesn't have as much like Mike Zimmer had a lot of reason to lie about injuries because of how completely insane everybody was about injuries all the time. He could be like, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. Like, it's nothing. Stop asking about it. And then it would be something, but he just didn't want to say. But these guys, they haven't gone through, they don't have that trauma yet. So they're chilling. But still no Jordan Addison. So you still have Jefferson and Osborne kind of being the 1 and 2. And then it sounds like Naylor is still the number 3. And that'll probably be the way that it is for proper minicamp itself. I think everybody's excited to have that kind of leadership figure of Justin Jefferson back. There are a couple things when it comes to the extension. There's a good piece from Alec Lewis at The Athletic that is about kind of how Justin Jefferson has discussed his expanding role as a leader. I mean, he is the face of the franchise right now. And the leadership responsibilities that come with that. You're the forward-facing person, so a lot of people are going to look to you in this situation or that one. But also just that there's this looming contract thing, and he's basically saying, I'm not going to let it distract me. Let's go play ball, which is exactly what you're supposed to say, right? We've spoken a lot this offseason about what that extension could be, should be. There's a couple different ways that it could go, but as with all things, time will tell. There are a bunch of other notes from OTAs, some more substantive than others. I mean, some of it's just depth chart stuff. Some of this is like what they're actually installing and how interesting that can be. So I want to make sure that I get into that as well. But for now, everybody, if you were worried about Justin Jefferson being a holdout, being a problem, demanding a trade to Cincinnati, everybody let your hair down, all right? Everything is going exactly according to how you would expect it to go. So we'll get into all of that next. Before we do so, however, let me tell you about America's #1 sportsbook and the sponsor of today's episode of Locked On Vikings, FanDuel. And it's America's #1 sportsbook for a very good reason. That is, if you are new, you can go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn and get a no-sweat first bet. Claim that no-sweat first bet. That means if you whiff on your first bet, maybe you bet on the Florida Panthers or the Miami Heat this week, and you whiffed, you get up to $2,500 back in bonus bets. $2,500. That is a juiced up number. For a long time, it was $1,000. Now it's even more, so get on it. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim it. And plus, FanDuel has an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. They have all kinds of promotions going on all the time, so check back here and there if there's a sporting event you like, whether it's one of the big 4 major men's American sports or something more obscure like a horse racing event or something. They've probably got something for that, so go check all of that stuff out, and when you win, it pays out instantly. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim that no sweat first bet. FanDuel, make every moment more. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done with this show, I would love it if you went over to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL and checked out the running backs thing that I did. I did a piece on the backs, mostly Ty Chandler and Kene Nwangwu, kind of showing my work a little bit on what we talked about with the Alexander Madison piece on kind of the things that I think that those guys stand to improve on. And if they do improve on them, then I think we can get excited about what they are, what they can be to the team. And then also kind of explaining this is why Alexander Madison's RB1 with tape and all that stuff. And I think a little more nuance than I can ever get into on this show. So go check that out. For us, however, we have other depth charts to discuss. While we're on the running back room, I guess, it looked like Dwayne McBride was back, at least according. I want to double check with Sam Ekstrom tomorrow on the Minnesota Football Party when I chat with him there on who was actually there, because he didn't tweet that McBride was inactive or not there, and he did do that log. I didn't see his name, so I assume he was there, but I want to double check. But that would be nice to see him back and then kind of check in on what that depth chart is. But elsewhere in the depth chart news, it was a very interesting day of mandatory minicamp. A couple of people have noticed that Mekhi Blackman's getting a lot of run with the ones. This caller in particular was pointed out that this is a pattern. So that's an interesting thing. And if you go back to the Mekhi Blackman conversation that I had when we drafted him in the post-draft, either the Patreon piece or I think I did a companion podcast for that as well, I kind of said, hey, if he starts right away, it's either a very good outcome or a very bad, or an outcome I would think is very bad, right? This is all just my personal opinion. But for me, there were some things about Blackman's game that I really wanted them to change. I wanted them to mess with a little bit. In particular, the way that he starts plays was too often in like a kick step or a 45-degree step, or you may even call it like a shuffle step, where he wouldn't be a full back pedal. He would open his hips 45 degrees and then shuffle out of the play. That opens you up to a blind spot. It's a bit of a safer way to play in terms of like what you can react to, because your feet are on the ground a little bit more and your momentum isn't going back as far, so you can react to like curls and hitches and stuff better. But it gives you a blind spot and it leaves you susceptible to certain things, and he doesn't really have the elite athletic profile required to like recover from those situations. So I kind of thought I wanted to change his game a little bit. So if he is going to start right away, it either means that my eval was just wrong and he was just doing that because that was what the coverage was, and he actually does have the back pedal move, and we just weren't seeing it at USC because that's just not what they were doing, which that's plenty possible. I'm wrong all the time. So that maybe the podcaster didn't watch the tape right. There's one possibility. Or it means that they're fine with that person and who Mekhi Blackman is, and that all of my criticisms are going to translate into the regular season. That's the scenario I don't want. So if Mekhi Blackman is actually going to be a day one starter and be with the ones, that could be a really great outcome. And I'm rooting for me to be wrong. I'm going to root against my own takes there. Because if I am wrong and he starts, that probably means he's actually coming along really well and he's good. And then that would become a pretty good pick for the last pick of the third round, right? I mean, that's phenomenal to get a day one starting player at a premium position there, right? So that's one thing. Mekhi Blackman getting a lot of run out of the slot in particular, which is also very interesting. You don't really get as much latitude to shuffle out of that. So that points to Luke being wrong, which, again, my favorite outcome at this point. Or he's just getting a lot of run with the ones for training purposes, and he's actually not going to start. We'll see a more real depth chart in camp when they're doing it every day, and then like in the preseason and stuff, they usually do unofficial ones, and that might be a little bit more informative. Elsewhere on the depth chart, there are some very interesting guys that got run with the ones in minicamp. Sometimes teams will do this. There will be random days in training camp where like all of your third teamers get a shot with the ones. And it's not because we think they can be a first teamer necessarily. A lot of times that's guys on the verge of getting cut. That you go, okay, let's throw them with the big boys and we expect them to get their tails kicked. But if they don't get their tails kicked, or like let's really ramp up the level of competition and say, okay, go prove yourself, go earn your keep, right? Or sometimes there's people on the cusp of going from third team to second team, and you go, all right, let's just ramp this up. Let's can this dude beat Christian Darrisaw? Then man, maybe let's go see, right? Or is he going to get pancaked by Christian Darrisaw, and then that's going to confirm all our priors, right? So that can be the case with a lot of these guys, but sometimes it's just a way to try it. It's just hey, let's this dude's kind of running on the third team. Let's see what he's got when he's surrounded by, first team talent. He's going up against first team talent. So those guys, Vidarian Lowe ended up taking the right tackle snaps. Brian O'Neill still out with that partially torn Achilles. He suffered at Lambeau last year. So right tackle snaps has been, I believe, Blake Brandel this whole time for all of OTAs. Vidarian Lowe gets it for minicamp. What will be interesting is if Vidarian Lowe keeps it, then we have some investigating to do, because he was tackle 5 last year. And if he just keeps that backup right tackle job, that means maybe he leapfrogged Blake Brandel. And that is not something that I expected. So I got to go look into that. I don't have a great eval on Vidarian Lowe right now. I can't tell you much, but I have actually been intending to watch his tape. So that's going to come soon. I might go watch his preseason tape back down again. Tristan Jackson also got some run with the ones. And Jaquelin Roy, again, another kind of rookie situation. Jaquelin Roy getting some run with the ones. I think this is the first time he's gotten run with the ones. So again, is this just one of those days where they're just trying it to give him a little bit of ramped up competition, get some tape on him, some things to coach up, and then we kind of go back to the threes where you can work on it? Or is he earning a job through OTAs? Now, here's the deal. Kevin O'Connell doesn't really evaluate it, or he didn't really evaluate last year in OTAs. I don't think I've heard a similar sentiment, but I also haven't heard an opposing one this year. So I guess we kind of just roll with that's the default. That OTAs, May, spring, this is for install learning, getting your feet wet, and the real camp battles start in training camp. That could also be the case. So there's a whole bunch of hedging for you, but the bottom line here is, I could say it all in one sentence: Jaquelin Roy, Tristan Jackson, Vidarian Lowe, Mekhi Blackman got some run with the ones. I guess make of that what you will. What I prefer to talk about now is some of the strategic things that I think that it sounds like have been happening here and what they mean for the Vikings playbook moving forward. I think there's some interesting stuff we can discern even from the outside, just from kind of context clues. So that's what we'll get into next. Moving on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of that Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I already kind of mentioned this a couple times because there's a clip on Twitter that sort of jumped out to me, but we've been hearing a lot about CJ Ham moving all around the formation, being used a lot, right? A lot of CJ Ham, a lot of 21, right? Which is, I mean, they extended him, right? You're not going to, that was kind of already implied. But moving him around the formation again confirms the Shanahan pilled allegations, the Shanny pill. But basically what that means is, so the way the Shanahan offense kind of functions, and I keep promising it, I want to do like a full show on exactly how this works and really break it down kind of at a more at the most granular level. But essentially, if you think about like a zone play, the offensive lineman will get told like, okay, you're just blocking zone, right? And then you'll have two lead blockers, let's say, a tight end and a wide receiver, if it's like 11 personnel and it's normal. You take that wide receiver out, you put in a CJ Ham. Now it's a tight end and CJ Ham lead blocking, and that'll be that. Whatever that play is, you're running the same play. You just changed the personnel and who was doing what. So for everybody else, it's all right. You're the inside pull, you're the outside pull on like outside zone lead, or they'll call it like Zorro, or Zorro Cat is another way to say it. Don't worry about all those words though. Just focus on like, okay, two lead blockers, right? In one version of the play, it's Hawkinson and CJ Ham. In another version of the play, it's Josh Oliver and CJ Ham. In another version of the play, it's Hawkinson and Josh Oliver, and you don't have CJ Ham on the field at all. And you'll switch guys up throughout the personnel packages, but every time you're running the same play, you're just getting to it from different spots, and you'll have the same essential like block angle and running aiming point and zone blocking up front, whether CJ Ham is starting by motioning across the formation and becoming a lead blocker that way, lining up like between the quarterback and the running back, like in your traditional like I formation, or offset I where he goes off to the side a little bit, and lead blocks that way. Offset I, but to the backside, so he's got to come back across the quarterback, and it's a little bit more complicated in the backfield, but that might screw with the defender. All of it is the same play. You're just kind of lining guys up in a different spot to start. It's a lot like what the thesis was supposed to be of the Fangio defense stuff we went over last year, which it was supposed to be all kinds of different looks, but from the same sort of start. Or I guess it's like the opposite of that. It was like supposed to be all these different things from similar alignments. So it was really, really hard to read. This is sort of the opposite, where it's the same thing a lot of the time and the same base core concepts, but it comes from so many different, I guess, window dressings that it creates confusion for the defense. What does that motion mean? What does this motion mean? What does this formation mean? That formation mean? And you try to sort of erase all your tendencies doing that. There's just too many moving parts. So your opponents can't pick out the variables and figure out what the tells are because there's just like too much stuff going on. And the problem is it's just more expensive to install, right? There's just more stuff going on. And that means, the more complicated it is, the easier it is for somebody to screw up. But hey, look, you got veterans, Alexander Madison, Josh Oliver, TJ Hawkinson, CJ Ham. These guys have all been around the block. You're not asking total newbies to learn this stuff as much. Younger running backs in the back with like McBride and Chandler and such. But that's, not that big a deal because those guys you're not going to be leaning on them. You have Alexander Madison. And so when I hear stuff, I want to say it was Alec Lewis that pointed out, hey, CJ Ham was all over the formation. I go, you know who else goes all over the formation? Kyle Juszczyk. And that's the way that the 49ers use him. CJ Ham is not Kyle Juszczyk. It's a different skill set, but a lot of the same like foundational principles still exist. Also on the defensive side, we've been hearing this a lot Josh Metellus in at safety a lot. And Josh Metellus has kind of been the breakout player of the defense. I think a lot of people expected Lewis Cine to just like come in and start de facto over him. I don't know if that was the right thing to expect. If you think about it, he was safety 4 behind Metellus in the first like September last year, right? Which we can be as disappointed as we want to be about that, right? So however you feel about that, hold on to that feeling and then ask yourself, did the dynamic change from that? I wasn't too worried about it because like, I don't know, you're a rookie, like you're just coming along, right? And he looks very fast and explosive, by the way, Lewis Cine does. We did a whole episode on him a bit ago. But if you think about like the moment he got hurt, he was safety 4. First OTA back is the first time he saw the field again. So there is no chance for him to do anything to sort of upset that status quo. It is on him to upset that status quo. I think it's naive to expect that they would just do it by default. And again, the real training camp battles maybe haven't even started. There might even not have been a chance anyways. So maybe that's a whole bunch of cope or whatever. Or maybe Josh Metellus is just kind of balling. And everybody's speaking very highly of Josh Metellus. He got the team captainship last year, great as a special teamer and all that stuff. He seems to be a defensive piece that the Vikings are actually pretty stoked on. So not to disrespect him at all too. We'll see exactly how things shake out when the bullets really start flying. And until then, I don't know. It's a lot of reading into things and projecting whatever your disposition is onto a situation that we honestly, hate to say it, don't really know anything about. And I know that sounds wishy-washy and we want to have all the answers. We want to be able to flip to the back of the book and get it all, but we just don't know a lot about it right now. But going into year 2, just because he is in year 2, putting him above Josh Metellus wouldn't be fair to Josh Metellus, right? That would be insane. I don't know why everybody expects that. But as for Josh Metellus, he is also in. And by the way, Harrison Smith and Cam Bynum are still the 2 starters. We're talking about safety 3 here. And there's a lot of snaps for safety 3. And so isn't that interesting? This is very Brian Flores. There's a lot of, there were times where he would have 5 corners on the field or 4 safeties or whatever. Like he would have your, 5, 6 DBs. He even had 7 DBs sometimes against particularly speedy offenses, would have whatever combination of dudes made sense for that situation. And that's why I kind of say like, the designations of starter, backup, CB2, CB3, CB4, safety 2, 3, 4. Eventually over the course of the season, you can maybe make that designation based on like percentage of snaps. But really, I think it's going to be more about figuring out, okay, who plays what role? Who is for what, right? Harrison Smith is probably just going to play high safety a lot, right? Cam Bynum is definitely going to play high safety a lot. And when a strong safety rolls down into the box, that's going to be a Harrison Smith thing. Think about like, it was Patrick Chung, right? Or was it McCourty? Which one was that guy for Belichick? I forget which was which every time. But there's that role, right? And then Bynum does the other one. And then you have Josh Metellus coming in and playing nickel sometimes, or maybe it's Mekhi Blackman playing nickel. Depends on what they like to do in the slot. Which one of those guys matches up with that better? Maybe it's Lewis Cine sometimes if you're worried about they're going to do a lot of. I don't know what the Packers are going to run with Jordan Love. Really, I'm not familiar with it. But I think about like the offense that they ran with Aaron Rodgers the last couple of years was very flats heavy. It was very, get the ball out quick and let Aaron Jones or Devontae Adams when he was there do things, right? With, shot plays sprinkled in. So I think of somebody like Asamoah or Cine being useful in that space of the, read, react, trigger downhill and make a tackle. And all of those guys will have different things. So you might have a scene heavy game against the Packers and then go up against a team that's got a totally different game plan. Like thinking about the Bears or the Lions who will run a bunch of power. Well, maybe you don't want as much Cine. He's kind of a wiry guy. Maybe you want Metellus, who I believe is a bulkier player. Check me on that. But you might want more of that, right? Or you might want another linebacker in the game. Maybe this is where you get Troy Reeder in the game instead. And what you would end up having, at least on those Patriots teams, and the Dolphins to an extent, but nobody noticed because everybody on those Dolphins defenses was bad. Those were like the tank years, right, with Brian Flores. Was you would have like the 5th linebacker getting snaps over the 3rd cornerback because that's just like what his job was for that. And you call him the 5th linebacker, but he would get the snaps because he was the guy that was really good against, screenplays to the flat, and you would specialize for. So it's specialized. That's the word I've been looking for. You specialize, and so when you're hearing a lot of 3 safety. They're going to specialize. You're going to see certain game plans be more favorable to some players than others, and so raw snap counts aren't going to reflect priority. They're just going to reflect the opponents we got, and having a myriad of options is going to be more valuable. Even if you have a couple options that you spent resources on that you don't use, you could have if you needed to, and that's what's important. Having as many answers to questions as possible is sort of the thesis of the DB room. And the concern is, what if they don't have answers to guys that are good at running routes, which everybody's got at least one of those, right? That's the concern. Who is actually good against guys that are good at running routes? And that's, it's a room full of young, unproven dudes. Who's going to step up? Will anyone step up? That becomes the concern. But hopefully everybody's, has something, and that will be the sort of thesis of this. Tomorrow, man, I really want to do that run game thing. I keep putting it off, but I'll get to it eventually. We'll keep going on the Everyman series as well. So I hope you guys check that out, and stick with me all week. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.